On the right, we have communist Russia. And on the left, we have capitalist U.S.
World of religious conflict with Stephanie Martinez.
U.S. wins. Now, America is the only superpower.
USSR falling apart. Why? Conservative leadership intent on maintaining status quo. Pressures from surrounding areas. Islamic fervor. Afghanistan and Iran. Afghanistan war proved expensive and unpopular, difficult to convey with Western Europe's economic success. China joins global market in 1978, leading to investment and growth. New U.S. policy. Jimmy Carter replaces Ronald Reagan. Bankrupt Russian economy, increased U.S. defensive, Russia tries to keep up. Welfare programs decrease, but Russia's diminishes. Explosion of the 1980s and the 1990s. Soviet economy degrades. Environmental destruction due to forced industrialization. Industrial production slows. Health problems and rigid central planning with poor morale increase. Military spending is increased. Mikhail Gorbachev, man of reform. Private ownership and electionalized control of industry, farming and industrial land ownership. Ideological changes. Independent of authoritarian government to resolve conflict and political changes. The new Constitution of 1988. More power to Parliament, Congress of People, deputies. Effects of reforms. Ethnic and religious riots emerge. Dismantling the Soviet Empire. Soviet bloc countries take the opportunity to revolt. Gradual economic and government changes. Methods. Mass demonstrations, rare violence. Ethnic tensions emerge. Hard to get back on track. For example, Romanian versus the ethnic Hungarians. According to Gorbachev, any nation has the right to decide its fate by itself. Renewed turmoil in 1991 to 1992. In 1991, attempted military coup stopped popular demonstrations, broke tradition, and people's supported democracy. Gorbachev is unable to use authority to agree on economic goals. Boris Yeltsin takes over, becoming Commonwealth of independent states. The issue. Should economic turn to full market system or the corruption of ineffective government? Vladimir Putin in 1999. Freedom of press, liberal society, and economic security and national glory. Spread of democracy. Theme of the 20th century, spread of the multi-party democracy with freely contested elections. Communism, fascism, authoritarian replaced with democracy. In Latin America, in the 1980s to the 1990s, all nations converted except Cuba. In the 1980s, Asian nations like Korea, Taiwan, and later the Philippines converted to democracy. In the 1990s, Indonesia, South Africa, Nigeria converted to democracy. Democracy and capitalism were attractive because they promised political stability, cultural prestige, economic success. Japan and India proved successful, with failed communism.
Hello, my name is Mr. Mustache, and today I will be teaching you about the great powers in any disputes. And remember, God bless America!
U.S. was the only lone power and the only country with the capability of military intervention around the globe. Russian power declined. There were severe economic problems. Economic growth was limited. Military forces were cut back. They needed to control the dismantling of nuclear bombs. China spread their economy and built up their military. It sought alliances against the U.S. In 2001, the United Nations excluded the U.S. from membership on its Human Rights Commission. U.S. power was enhanced by rapid economic growth and U.S. leadership in technology and bioengineering. U.S. advocated a worldwide free market economy. The emerging nations of Iran, Iraq, and North Korea, aka Axis of Evil, were new threats that sponsored terrorism, which justified increased military spending. The end of U.S.-Soviet rivalry led to regional rivalries. The Middle East was in constant conflict. U.S. kicked Iraq out of Kuwait in the Persian Gulf War and tried to settle peacefully Balkan situation. In 2003, U.S. and Britain tried to topple Saddam Hussein's authoritarian regime. Though an autonomous Palestinian government was set up over two territories within Israel, tensions continued. There was a cycle of Palestinian terrorist bombings. Israel attacked Palestinian cities. India and Pakistan had many border clashes, particularly around Kashmir. Both sides tested nuclear bombs. Increased Hindu nationalism with India was matched by fiercer Muslim rhetoric. However, there were regions working together. NATO's purpose was put into question. Today, it continues to provide European security. Most Eastern European countries saw entry into the European Union. The euro was established as a common currency. The North American Free Trade Agreement was an agreement that created an essentially free trade among Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. in hopes of encouraging economic growth in all three nations. It increased trade, but with loss of jobs to Mexico. There was environmental damage as factories were less regulated in Mexico. The areas of East Asia coordinated. Pay attention! There were new ethnic conflicts due to new global interactions which united group identities. Ethnic identity was needed to combat the influx of other cultures. The collapse of multinational states such as the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia, where ideologies such as communism were the uniting force, paved the way for ethnic identity. Nations gave more voice to minorities. Right-wing governments offered anti-immigration policies in favor of protecting jobs and cultural identity for the majority national group. In former Soviet territories, Czechoslovakia split peacefully into two ethnic segments, Czech Republic and Slovakia. The Hungarian minorities in Romania and Turkish minorities in Bulgaria faced new pressures during the 1990s. Muslim Chechnya tried to break away, so they used terrorism. Russia fought using military action. Serious warfare erupted periodically between Armenian Christians and their Muslim neighbors in Azerbaijan. In Yugoslavia, the end of communism led to massive bloodshed. It became Albanian Muslims versus Slavic Serbs versus Slavic Croats versus Muslim Slavs. The independence of Bosnia and Herzegovina led to bitter fighting among Catholic Croats, Orthodox Serbs, and Muslims. An ethnic cleansing occurred to kill and remove non-Serb populations to facilitate Serb control. At the end of the 1990s, warfare broke out between Serbs and Muslims in Kosovo. In Rwanda, the Hutus and Tutsis were old rivalries who disputed over power. The Tutsis ruled but were outnumbered by resentful Hutus. Thus the Hutus slaughtered hundreds of thousands and over 2 million were driven from their homes. Ethnic tensions were leading not just to warfare, but to renewed acts of genocide that targeted civilians, including women and children, and the creation of massive refugee populations. There is some hesitation from outside forces to intervene, but no policies that offered to battle against the ethnic conflict. Pay attention!
Today on Ariana's show, hot topic, globalization. With your host, Ariana Della Rosa.
Globalization, the connectedness of communication, culture, and politics. Because of globalization, it broke down the Soviet Union, improved communication, banking, and computing. Not only that, but international investments increased. Export and imports led to extended business organizations, and it also promoted industrialization. But during this time, there was a slow-growing population, thus leading to a need for more labor. It created multinational Western nations, but there was also tensions between local population and foreigners. But yeah, then positives is that the homogeneity was caused by the adoption of Western cultural values, art, goods, and English language. So basically most of the stuff that people learn are from the West, so I guess that's a good sign of globalization. And political forms globalized slowly, like they globalize slower than technology. Some institutions of globalization were the United Nations, as they tried to prevent disputes. The International Monetary Fund and World Bank helped organize trade, and the G8 summit was a meeting of industrialized nations. Besides the good stuff that happened in globalization, people more found it as a negative thing because it threatened the environment, and I guess it introduced a more extreme type of pollution, and also the trade balances weren't working that well. So overall, despite globalization having a lot of good things to it, many people saw it as a bad thing. Did you know McDonald's was the most important cultural movement like in the whole entire world?
No, tell me more.
Tell me more, tell me more.
So basically, because of McDonald's, tensions with Russia ended because they like consumer goods, and since McDonald's spread to Russia, they like McDonald's, so I guess everything was with peace. And also it spread to other places around the world like Japan and like Europe and everywhere, and it became really important, and McDonald's was in overall 109 nations all around the world by 1998. Yeah.
Me encanta.
Love ko to. 저기.
Oh, seduction.
I'm loving it.
I choose you, Nokia.
I choose you, Erickson. My Erickson is evolving. I choose my touch.
Oh my god, I choose my touch too.
I have a my touch too.
I have a my touch 3!
Blah, sha, blah, blah.
World of Religious Conflict with Stephanie Martinez.
So back in the 80s, many people were against the new cultural patterns that were developing, and because many people were starting to go away from their cultural beliefs and traditions. So an example would be how Japan, instead of training their kids to use the chopsticks, they started using forks and eating fast food. So that was one of the traditions that they lost. And then in France, instead they forbid them to mix in English words into their language. And so in many European countries began pushing away immigrants because they wanted their main European families to be dominant over them. And then so to try to push away globalization, many religious groups formed together and they became fundamentalist movements, which they tried to push away from the new traditions that were coming into their culture, such as films and music. They pushed away from that and tried to bring people back to their religious cultures and their traditions. You guys, wake up! Come on, you have to remember to always stay true to your cultural and all your religious beliefs.
20th century, global terrorism was inspired by some nationalist religious currents in many parts of the world. They used new methods of terrorism on some of the apparatus of globalization. They used this method called terrorism to reach across regional boundaries. They pulled attacks on important places and principles. The terrorists used highly trained secret military to go against the power of regular military forces. They also attacked innocent civilians. To show their demand.
The act of terrorism was not new. One of the examples of terrorism was bombing. Another example of terrorism was assassination attempts. Fall down.
World War I started because of terrorist assassinations against Austrian air. Technological advances like bombing expanded the destructive, devastating effect of terrorist acts.
The attack on U.S. on September 11, 2001, which killed about 3,000 American citizens because of Islamic terrorists.
Bye, honey. I'm going to France. Honey, I'm home. Oh, hi, honey. Honey, I have to tell you something. Yes?
I'm sorry, Ariana, but you have been diagnosed with AIDS.
I have AIDS. Me too! Back in 1896, there was a Swedish scientist. His theory was global warming, but no one took the warning because it was just so forward, a little too boring. Now here comes 1930. She just counted degrees on global warming, but people still torment the idea. So in the 50s, Canada some shifted with a little researching. Now let's be the merchants, sell them new fridges. Too bad they got those CNCs, which react to make O2 and not O3. Now time to have a party in Kyoto, Japan. You see, it was called the Kyoto Protocol. After all, the U.S. did not be a part of the ties to cut back on emissions. U.S. was out and Japan was itching.
Hey Kyle.
Hey,
So, I must ask you a question, but I'll save it for later.
okay,
Psych! Pop quiz!
okay.